Welcome everyone to Dropkick Discussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue. And Tom, I was thinking this week maybe our podcast needed some type of tagline, but I couldn't think of anything better than the horror show, which I think we've got to be able to do better than that. So surely we can come up with something better than the tagline they came up with for Extreme Rules.
Oh no, absolutely not. That is perfect. That is money right there. And you know, when the show comes around, I'm going to be playing the horror show drinking game, and I'm going to be passed out before the show even begins.
And who doesn't like a horror show in the middle of July? I mean, let's not save it for October or Halloween time. Let's have a pay-per-view event entitled The Horror Show in the middle of the summer.
To be fair, I've been in lockdown for a while now. I'm stunned that it's July tomorrow. Or when this comes out, it'll be July then.
Yeah.
It's my birthday in a week, and I still feel like we're in March.
Yeah, time is definitely... it's passed by fast and slowly, kind of all at the same time. It's a weird vortex that we're in right now. Well, let's talk about the Extreme Rules, the horror show, and talk about some of the matches that we know have been made official for that event. The big one being Braun Strowman defending the Universal Championship against Bray Wyatt. And now this isn't going to be just any old match. This is going to be a Wyatt swamp fight for the championship. Tom, please tell us, what is a Wyatt swamp fight?
Well, from what I'm hearing, it's going to be very similar to the swamp fight of ages past, where the Wyatt family took on the New Day in that great feud where Xavier Woods started sprouting hair on his face, which is so strange and so surreal to have hair on one's face. Now, naturally, it'll be a little more cinematic and it'll bring in some elements of Bray feud of Matt Hardy as well. I expect it'll be the main event, and it'll be very different, I tell you that.
So a little bit, kind of ultimate deletion, type of thing, or, do you think it will be more similar to that? Or do you think it'll be more similar to the Firefly Funhouse? Maybe a combination of both? What are you kind of expecting to see as far as the match itself?
The set looks more ultimate deletion than Firefly Funhouse at the moment. However, it's Bray Wyatt. You never can tell.
Now, I was thinking, some of the surprises that maybe the WWE could have in store for this match, and I thought about, what about the possibility of maybe seeing Eric Rowan make an appearance? And I thought that because, we've seen Sarah Logan. She appeared in one of the skits with the Viking Raiders and the Street Profits after the fact that she had been released. So any probability of maybe, someone like Eric Rowan, a former Wyatt family member, making a one-time surprise appearance in this type of match?
It's possible, but I can't say it's likely. Even if he has signed a new contract, now I'm not aware as of yet that he signed a new one, Eric Rowan's not going to appear in a match that Bray Wyatt loses, even though it is back at the swamp, as it were, especially when they weren't connected in any way when Eric Rowan left. Personally, I don't see Strowman losing the championship just yet, so even though Eric Rowan was featured in a couple of clips, so was Luke Harper, who clearly isn't going to be here for this particular match, so I don't see it happening personally.
Well, let's talk about, since you don't see Strowman losing the championship, let's talk about maybe a little bit further down the road. You would have to believe that ultimately this feud leads to a match at SummerSlam between Strowman and The Fiend. The Fiend character of Wyatt. He's got these multiple characters that it looks like he's drawn on now, but obviously kind of the end-all be-all is The Fiend himself. Is that the going plan going into SummerSlam, is to have kind of one more clash between these two for the championship, with The Fiend making an appearance at SummerSlam?
Pretty much, yeah. The moment right now where Bray Wyatt is playing the old character that he used to play back when he first debuted is just a way to add a bit more time to the feud. There aren't many people, like who else is actually an option to face Strowman at SummerSlam? There's just not that many people at the top level on SmackDown, once you discount people like Baron Corbin and Roman Reigns, who is not available, of course. So The Fiend seems to be the only possible option, and I feel that's a shame, because with him being the only possible option, chances are he's going to take that title away.
Now, you mentioned Roman Reigns for SummerSlam, and obviously he's not going to be back probably for that August event, but he did make some pretty interesting comments that came out on social media this week about him being training and being ready to come back when the time was right, and that basically he was putting everybody on the roster on notice that when he comes back, he's essentially going to prove to everyone why he is still the man in the company. No matter who comes out on top of this feud, whether it's Strowman, whether it's Bray Wyatt, and we talked about that on last week's show. If you want to go back and look at last week's show for some of our listeners, we talked at length about kind of the directions for Strowman and Wyatt coming out of this feud. But no matter who ends up with the strap at the end, are they ultimately a placeholder for when Roman Reigns comes back? He's going to be the guy, and he will basically simply just take the title off of whoever's holding it on SmackDown at the time?
No, and the reason for that is because he hasn't been available, so they haven't written anything with him in mind. They've been writing a SmackDown with the idea that Roman Reigns may never be back. Now, we know he will eventually be back, but with the writing, they haven't written anything thinking, oh, at this point, Roman Reigns can come in or Roman Reigns can be involved. They've been writing as if he will never return. So chances are when he does return, it'll either be in an extremely convenient time, as in a championship has just changed hands or a feud has just ended, or he might be slumming it with some of the lower carders for a bit. And to be honest, that'll probably be a very good thing for some of those lower carders.
As long as
who doesn't want to see Roman Reigns versus Mojo Rawley? Who doesn't want to see that?
Hey, like I said, I'd be fine as long as it's not Baron Corbin. As long as we don't go revisit that feud, then I'm fine with anybody else they want to put Roman Reigns with. Let's talk about something else interesting on SmackDown was a tribute to The Undertaker. Now, we saw, and we talked about this last week as well, that the Last Ride documentary came to an end. The Undertaker kind of, sort of, maybe announced officially his retirement from the ring. Maybe. We're still not 100% sure, but it certainly seemed to be leaning that direction at the end of that documentary. Then we see this tribute from the SmackDown roster, and I gotta say, it struck me as a little bit odd. I know the documentary, The Last Ride, came to an end, but it just kind of seemed out of place that, okay, now we're going to have this tribute from the SmackDown roster, to pay homage to The Undertaker. I know SmackDown, a lot of people do think of that as being The Undertaker's show because, when the brand split happened, he was kind of a big figurehead over on the Blue brand for a while. But it just still seemed a little bit out of place. Was this segment and then the Boneyard match that they showed on there as well, was that simply a last-minute time killer due to a lot of the COVID testing and that was going on last week?
It was. An episode of SmackDown was already scripted that they essentially had to abandon completely due to cancellations for the filming as well as everything else going on. That was filmed on the day when it had been planned to be filmed almost 2 weeks beforehand. There were positive COVID tests, but there were also people sent home because they didn't respect social distancing. I won't speculate on who was or wasn't infected. That's not for me to do. But it did mean that they had a whole lot of time and not many people to fill it with. In the circumstances, the decision was made about 2 days beforehand to make it a tribute episode, and the editing team had to work overtime for this one.
Did the tribute that they have on SmackDown, as out of place it maybe it was, or last minute as it was, do you think that the WWE kind of on camera and on television acknowledging the fact that maybe in their mind The Undertaker is done, he is retired, do you think that them making kind of an angle out of it makes it more or less likely that we actually do see The Undertaker in the ring again at some point?
Hard to say. Ultimately, it comes down to when Vince McMahon feels that it is the right time to send The Undertaker a message on WhatsApp, which is a phrase I never thought I'd hear myself say. Send The Undertaker a message on WhatsApp. And essentially say to him, look, let's have this match. And then it's up to The Undertaker to say yes or no. Or I think it depends who the opponent is. Honestly, I think The Undertaker is probably going to want to work with quite a few people who are coming through, even though he may be wanting to retire. People like Aleister Black. And yes, that does include people like Baron Corbin. So I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, speaking of people coming in and coming out, there was quite a big piece of news that came out this week over on Impact, which we don't talk a whole lot about on the show, but when a company's world champion gets released, it's a pretty big deal no matter who you are. And that's exactly what happened at Impact, because Tessa Blanchard, who was their world champion, obviously has a lot of notoriety for being a woman and the world champion of a top wrestling company. I mean, they're probably still in the, probably number 3 or 4 in the United States. But so to have a woman as your champion is a big deal. And she's released. She has to give up the title. They vacate the championship, and she's gone. Tell us first what led to her release from the company.
Well, you're right. We don't talk about Impact much. And there is one guy on Reddit who continually spreads lies about me because he wants me to talk about Impact more. So this is for you, weird guy who constantly spreads lies. He keeps telling people that I got fired from PW Torch, and none of these cyber sleuths on there think maybe we should ask Wade Keller. Not one of them. Because if any of them did, they would all stop saying it. But anyway, Tessa Blanchard essentially had a multitude of things that happened. There were some no-shows. She was not filming promos they asked her to do. There was also a number of media appearances that were organised when she first won the championship that she was expected to attend, but she didn't, or she evaded phone calls and the like. When the news first broke of the accusations against her, Impact were concerned, but held their ground at that point. This, however, was just a last straw.
Do you have any inclination about what her motivations were for having this type of behavior? I mean, a lot of times we'll see people like in the sports world that when they want a new contract, or maybe they want out of their current contract, they'll start doing these types of things, no showing practices and not doing media events and things in the hopes that their team will fire them and release them because they have become such a problem for them. Do you have any inclination that maybe could that possibly have been part of Tessa's motivation, that maybe she wanted out of Impact and this was her way of doing it as well? If I just go dark and, ghost the company, that maybe they'll just release me and fire me and then I can go wherever I want to?
As someone who doesn't know the woman personally, I really can't comment as to her motivation. It's difficult at the moment to get facts related to this. And that's what really we have to focus on. As a pro wrestling journalist, my focus is factual. We really can't speculate as to why Tessa Blanchard makes her choices. We have to wait for her to either explain them or for someone else to explain their impression of it. We cannot speculate in that regard.
Yeah, it does just seem strange to be in the position that she is or was, and then to be doing some of the things that ultimately led to her being let go from the company. So it is a weird situation. Now, obviously, the big question on everybody's mind after this news broke was, is there interest from the WWE about bringing her in?
There definitely is. I've mentioned this already. She's a big name now, and there's a number of people within the WWE who've been singing Tessa's praises for a while. I don't know for sure whether they take the punt, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'm not going to name any names of who in the company have been essentially chewing Vince's ear off as to, you should hire Tessa Blanchard, you should hire Tessa Blanchard. But he finds it very difficult to get away from it, I'll tell you that.
Do you know anything about what her relationship is like with her father, Tully Blanchard, and would her relationship with him sway her in either way as far as maybe signing with AEW as opposed to the WWE?
I can't really speculate as to personal relationships, but what I would say is it's difficult for me to see a way in which AEW would actually offer her a contract. Tony Khan has been steadfast in what his company stands for, and he has held to that, especially when you consider people that he has banned from attending the promotion. She's been accused of going against those values that he holds dear. Many conversations would need to take place to convince them that it wasn't true or that she had changed before they would offer her anything.
Now, since we are talking about Impact and Tessa Blanchard is leaving the company, but we got word that there may be another act that's coming into the company. So here you go, Reddit guy. This is number 2 Impact topic on the podcast today. So you should be happy. So apparently coming into Impact very soon will be the team of Gallows and Anderson, who were released from the WWE during all of the layoffs and furloughs a month or so back, and they're apparently coming in to Impact. Reports are that they also have some provisions in their contracts that they're also going to be able to work some New Japan dates, and that they also may even run their own promotion at the same time as well. What can you tell us about possibly the members of the OC coming in to Impact?
Well, I reported back on June 5th that Impact had offered several ex-WWE talents short-term contracts that also allowed them to work for New Japan. Now, the idea was that they would sign this as a stopgap to keep the work coming in while they couldn't really leave the country, and potentially Impact could convince them to stay long-term. Now, I didn't mention names at the time because I didn't want to jeopardize the negotiations in any way, but I can confirm at this point that Gallows and Anderson were two of several names on that list. Obviously, they have their own system that they want to use. They've been offered a contract that works within their requirements. So I think they will be a great addition to Impact. They will add a lot to it. Whether or not they will draw more eyes is difficult to say. We will see when they debut. But I think it's worth pointing out how crazy a world we live in right now, that you just said the releases were about a month ago, and it feels that way, but it was actually 2.5.
Oh, wow.
2.5 months. Middle of April.
Gosh. Now, if they do end up over in New Japan, is it too easy to say that they'll just jump back into being members of the Bullet Club, or do you think that maybe they'll have a different direction for them? Again, I know we don't talk a lot of New Japan, so, hey, if there's a New Japan fan on Reddit, hey, here's your time of the show as well. So if they do end up over in New Japan for a couple of dates, do you think they just pick up where they left off and as members of the Bullet Club, or maybe they give them something fresh?
I think I might be the New Japan fan who is satisfied by this particular conversation. But easy isn't necessarily a bad thing. If they want to go over there, rejoin the Bullet Club under Jay White, all power to them. They have tremendous history and pedigree over there. And to my knowledge, that's where they want to be. First and foremost, they wanted to be back in Japan. If not for the current pandemic, I would imagine they would already be back in Japan and they'd be wrestling in the New Japan Cup, because God knows they needed a few more names for that cup. 32 people. They had to pull out some names we haven't seen for a while in that tournament. I think they're going back. I look forward to seeing it because I think they can add a lot. And really, it depends whether or not Impact can convince them to stay long-term in Impact. I think that's possible, but not necessarily likely.
Let's switch over to Raw now. One of the interesting things that to me that stuck out on Raw was the fact that Ric Flair was on Raw this week, but he wasn't accompanied by Randy Orton. And a lot of people, myself included, feel like Orton is the top heel, the hottest heel in the company, maybe the hottest heel in all of wrestling right now. But he's not on the show. Ric Flair is. Why is it that Flair is being paired with Orton at this point in time? You know, like I said, I don't feel like Orton needs Ric Flair. You know, I think he's hot enough on his own that he doesn't need Flair. Obviously, Flair doesn't need the rub from being paired with Orton, and he's not even really, at this point, at best, he would be a semi-regular participant, you know, in the WWE. Not even combining that with the optics of a 70-plus-year-old man being repeatedly brought into a facility where there have been positive COVID cases lately. So what is the thinking behind Ric Flair being paired with Randy Orton at this point in time?
The most obvious suggestion from where I'm sitting would be that the WWE brought back the Legend Killer and want to close that angle out by punting one of the biggest legends in the history in the face. Certainly possible. Wouldn't like to see it myself. More importantly, though, Orton has a limited date contract, so there will be times when he simply isn't available for use. He only works a set number of dates, and while the lack of live events at the moment is freeing him up a little bit, they are being very picky, particularly as regards the amount of matches that Orton wrestles. Very low. Since WrestleMania, he's in fact only wrestled the WrestleMania match and the greatest wrestling match ever. There will be times when Orton isn't there, and that means that they need someone to be a mouthpiece in those moments. I do just want to point out, I'm not myself a fan of Ric Flair being there when they know that COVID-19 has been in that performance center. They have been doing everything in their power now to keep COVID-19 out. He was there because they were confident they had succeeded in that. But last week he said that Randy Orton was the greatest wrestler in WWE history. This week, he is simply the greatest wrestler of all time. I worry that Ric Flair's been watching the New Japan Cup and he wasn't impressed.
Yeah, like I said, it just seems strange to me. I mean, I know there's history there, but I just think, at this point in time, for a lot of reasons, I don't really see why Flair is necessary. I mean, if Orton can't be there, why not do a pre-tape interview and show it, or maybe just not have him on the show at all, and maybe that makes people want to see him more because he's not there every week. But so I don't know, it just kind of seems strange to me to be that Flair would be the guy kind of picked for this role. Now, we talked last week about the guy that Orton has now been paired with for this next feud, and that's being the Big Show, who, if you haven't lost track by now, he's now a face. Like, I know he was a heel back right after WrestleMania. Now he's back as a face. He pretty much just goes where he's needed, I think, at this point. So the Big Show's back. If you want to call him a legend, and he's here to feed the legend killer, then so be it. So how long will this latest return of the Big Show actually last?
Well, he did call himself a legend, which I felt was bold. I don't feel that people should call themselves legends, even though I do feel the Big Show is deserving of the title given how long he's been in the industry and the career that he's had. He's not going to be here too long, though. It'll be longer than his last return because that was 2 weeks. And that wasn't even his last return. His last return was WrestleMania, and that was 20 minutes?
Yeah.
10 minutes? Something like that. But this is a filler feud. Orton versus Edge was supposed to be the SummerSlam match with Lesnar lined up for Drew McIntyre. Now that Edge is out of the picture, they've given Orton something to do while they work out what to do next. If they can't get Lesnar into the country, or if they just need someone for McIntyre, we may end up with McIntyre versus Orton, but we need to kill a little bit of time on the way.
Yeah, I've said on the show before that McIntyre versus Orton would be the match that I would want. I think that's the money feud. You could bring Lesnar in maybe for a smaller show, or maybe even hold it off till Survivor Series. But for me right now, you strike while the iron's hot. I'd like to see McIntyre versus Orton at SummerSlam as opposed to McIntyre Lesnar, but that's just me.
Well, the last I heard it was McIntyre Lesnar. However, that was before COVID-19 started to run through, before the US opened up so much that the spike went back up again. Lesnar may not want to travel. He may not be able to travel. Also, to be fair, he may prefer to work with Bobby Lashley.
Now, we talked about why Flair is being used. Let's talk about a couple of superstars that are not being used at the time. And most notably, Liv Morgan and Natalya in the women's division are not being used on Raw. And, Tom, you've got some details about why that may be the case, that these couple of divas are not really being used in the women's division right now.
You said a naughty word there, calling them divas. Got to be careful.
Oh yeah. Superstar.
There are some people who like the tag diva, and some people who don't. A diva isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a character trait at this point, rather than a definition of an entire brand or division. And for me, that's how it should be. If someone's character is that they are a diva, there's nothing wrong with being called a diva. Together with a number of other women's superstars, they were told not to come into the Performance Center. This includes Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville, who were not on SmackDown. Because of a boat trip they all went on in violation of the social distancing expectations of the company. The WWE have been very strict about limiting the interactions of their talent since before WrestleMania, and this is why Daniel Bryan has barely seen his family. They always say you've got to take 2 weeks away, quarantined, then 2 weeks away, quarantined, to come back again. This is why Bray Wyatt, for example, vanished for a little while to go and see his child. They were told to self-quarantine, so they were not on the show. Though for some reason Lana was still. Don't ask me for an answer on that one.
Speaking of COVID, do want to touch on a couple things. It has been a little bit of a rough week for the WWE, just all things considered. First off, let's talk about the positive COVID tests. Really seemed to come out in bunches this past week of reports that there were positive tests from members of the company at the Performance Center, including Renee Young, who kind of outed herself on social media, and there were even reports that maybe the WWE wasn't exactly happy with the fact that she came out on her own and announced that she was one of the employees to test positive for COVID. And we also know, if you follow AEW, that her husband, Jon Moxley, also removed himself from Dynamite last week because of the fact that it was reported that he'd been in secondary contact with the virus, but you also have to think that if Renee is positive, that obviously he's been in contact with his wife at some point, so that was probably a big reason why he also decided to self-quarantine. But whatever the case, what can you tell us about this rash of positives that have leaked out from the WWE and kind of the effect that they're having on the company as a whole the past couple weeks?
Well, there's been a lot of emergency meetings and a lot of emergency rewrites. There has been a lot of situations whereby someone has had a negative test, gone back to work, and in the days that followed had another test that came back positive. Now, when it comes to Jon Moxley, he did say, it was announced that he would not be at the show at Dynamite because he had been in secondary contact. He had been in contact with someone who had been in contact with someone who had COVID-19. That's because the person he'd been in contact with had tested negative for the virus at that time. There is no guarantee that it has changed since. WWE's hope was that no one would announce that they had COVID, and thus nobody would be able to confirm that COVID-19 had actually been in the Performance Center. Because if nobody like Renee Young actually speak up and say, I have it, it becomes very difficult for a journalist to be able to confirm that when they say there is COVID-19 in the WWE. I have been told by numerous people that the number got up to 30. I haven't had an update since, but the difficulty is that it's impossible for proof to happen now without people coming up and saying, yeah, I was one of them. That's how WWE controls this narrative. It's a typical PR move. Everybody does it. I personally want to wish everyone currently suffering with COVID-19, WWE and anywhere around the world, all the best of luck in defeating it. I was extremely lucky to suffer only lightly when I had it, but it still wasn't fun, and I'm aware that many people are unfortunately not so lucky. Another
somewhat negative story that was making the rounds this past week was the future of NXT UK. They had a number of roster members who were involved in some not-so-great accusations last week, and so there were rumors going around that WWE may just axe the entire territory and just decide to fold NXT UK altogether. What can you tell us at this time about, at this point, what the future for NXT UK might look like?
Well, I was told last week that a meeting was taking place to discuss the future of NXT UK. Now, that's a very open-ended phrase, the future of NXT UK. So I did some digging and I asked around, and I'm told with multiple contracts due up in September and very little product left that hasn't already been shown, the WWE has been struggling to honour the deal with TV suppliers to keep bringing something for them to show. Also, until very recently, in the UK, you couldn't film in a private setting because you couldn't have a gathering of that many people. Now, as part of this meeting, there were reasons given as to why they might consider shutting NXT UK down, either temporarily or long-term. They also have the opportunity, of course, to use the furlough system, which they have used in WWE proper. I reported on this. The rumour mill went into overdrive at that moment, and the idea was because they had been discussing the idea of shutting NXT UK down, NXT UK was definitely shutting down. I'd reported on a meeting. In addition, in that report, I also covered some of the things from the Speaking Out movement, whereby I have been speaking with a number of victims or accusers of this. Some of it hasn't been proven yet or confirmed in any way. In that case, they are accusers rather than victims of a crime, because a crime has to be proven first, as it were. So it's just semantics. So with things like that, there is a lot in the report about the WWE contacting, either by extension or actually directly, people who have been accusing their superstars to see if they are pursuing police action. If they have, people are being released or suspended. And this is why I can confirm that there are more suspensions or releases expected. Things haven't been moving that quickly because it's the police and they take their time to make sure they get a thorough investigation. Now, the WWE has been getting advice on the COVID-19 situation over here in the UK, and there was a conference call with talent to essentially say, look, we're out of content, we need to start filming some more, let's get back to work. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister over here, has stated that a lot more of the country will be open up come July 4th. Couldn't have come at a better time, really, because NXT is going back to work, and I am very happy to hear it. I have a ticket for TakeOver Dublin, and I intend to use it.
Now, amidst all this COVID-19 stuff, there was a report that came out just today that I saw on social media that Vince McMahon's net worth is actually up 10%. And you also had a tweet kind of following up on that about the stock prices for the WWE, about how they were at such a high, I think it was over $100 a share at one point, and it dropped to under 30, and then I think it had rallied up into the 40s, but still, not even half of what it was at its peak. But still, as stock prices are falling, Vince's net worth is actually up 10% during this epidemic or pandemic. Or I mentioned that fact because I wanted to ask you and get your thoughts on the idea that, in my opinion, really ever since probably the mid-2000s, when WWE went from USA Network over to Spike Television and then back again, but when they have all these networks throwing these big money TV contracts at them and are in bidding wars for their product, that really ever since that time, I feel like Vince McMahon and the WWE have made a concerted effort to make the WWE brand the superstar of the company and not the wrestlers themselves, so that TV companies, for example, are bartering for the product itself, not because they want a guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock on their television channel, but they just want WWE programming. And then also vis-a-vis, no matter how bad the product may be, Vince McMahon and the company still make money because, hey, it's still the WWE. It doesn't really matter what type of product we give you, because their opinion is that fans are still going to watch because the WWE logo is attached to whatever it is they see on their screen, and that's going to last longer than, how over, Steve Austin or a Rock or even a John Cena might be. What are your thoughts just on that opinion that, the WWE as a brand is becoming really the superstar of the company, and that maybe that has been to the detriment of the product itself because the wrestlers themselves are no longer the focal point? They don't really need to get over like a Hulk Hogan or a Steve Austin did back in the day, because the WWE itself is really what fans are tuning in to see.
Well, this decision was made quite a while back when they essentially moved from trying to be a sports promotion to being sports entertainment. When you look at the entertainment industry, Game of Thrones wasn't built around, come see Jon Snow, because Jon Snow in that show could die at any time. There is a lot of back and forth when it comes to talent, and the amount of people who are at the top for a long time is very small. So they need to be realistic here. And the idea was, even back in the Attitude Era, when they lost Diesel and they lost Razor Ramon, we can't build around an individual anymore, because that individual might go to WCW. And Bret Hart was really the changing point there. It wasn't so much Hulk Hogan, because they felt Hulk Hogan had done everything he could, wrong as they were. But Bret Hart was the one where they really thought, okay, that's it. We need to change our attitude here. But when it comes to the making money aspect, ticket sales and merch really don't account for too much anymore. Content on digital is worth millions, and TV deals are worth hundreds of millions. So really, it's about pitching to those TV deals and networks way more than it is about satisfying the fans who watch. It's all about getting the casual fan base. And this is something I don't feel enough people really understand. More often than not, you as a hardcore wrestling fan are not the target audience. Vince McMahon will always find a way to make money. The WWE share price took a huge tumble even before the pandemic hit. But this just shows the world we live in right now, that most rich people have gotten a lot richer in the last 4 months.
Do you think that it has been to the detriment of the product itself? That, if Vince McMahon was really being super honest that he wants his superstars to get over, but maybe not too over to the point that they outshine the WWE itself as a company, so they don't have too much leverage, they don't have too much popularity because, hey, we don't want anybody getting bigger than the company. In my opinion, Hulk Hogan back in the height of Hulkamania, I think at a time was bigger than the WWF. When you thought of wrestling, you thought of Hulk Hogan, and then you thought, oh yeah, he wrestles for the WWF. Nowadays, you think of wrestling and you think of WWE. There's not necessarily one big name that pops into your mind as the face of wrestling. Most people, I think, would just think of, oh, wrestling is the WWE. So do you think that strategy has had a negative effect on the product itself and like I said, and the wrestlers themselves being able to get over to the level that maybe they could if the company really got behind them and pushed them in that type of direction?
Not at all, because if it had been, then The Rock probably wouldn't have happened. The John Cena wouldn't have happened. The current name at the moment, The Miz, is getting to that level where people watch a Miz TV show, not Miz TV, but a Miz reality TV show like Miz and Mrs. and tune in, or in fact the Marine franchise. The idea is to get everyone bigger than the WWE. That's why they have the reality shows. That's why they have the movies. That's why they released the Rock song with Wyclef Jean. This is why they do all of this stuff. The idea is that if you are bigger than the WWE, then more people are going to come to the WWE. That's why The Rock came back. That's why Batista came back. That's why Tyson Fury and Cain Velasquez have been involved. That's the plan. That's how they get everyone over, because getting everyone over is the dream. I hate this idea that we constantly hear that WWE, particularly Vince, is intentionally scuppering a push. If someone's getting over, he's making money from that person. He's going to do everything he can to help.
Yeah, but we have seen a lot of examples that most of the time if you get bigger than the WWE, then they usually leave and they're not in the WWE anymore. The Rock got bigger than wrestling. He left. Batista, got, probably not bigger than WWE, but still, he left. John Cena looks like he's gone. So I think there is a give and take that you want to get those guys over, but if they get so over that they leave your company, you can't make money off of them anymore.
Actually, you can. Because if you search WWE in Google, you get everything WWE. If you search The Rock, you get a lot of stuff The Rock does. And you get a lot of YouTube videos. And this is what I mean when I say about digital being worth millions. If someone Googles right now Batista and they find a YouTube video of Batista in the WWE, they watch it, the WWE earns money. The WWE earns money from Batista matches on the network. Everything that they have ever done in the WWE still exists and can still be watched. So the WWE will continue to make money. The bigger they get, even outside of the company, the more traffic they drive into the company.
Last thing we'll talk about this week is this upcoming Wednesday night. NXT is going to present the Great American Bash, and it's actually going to be a 2-week event, both this Wednesday and next Wednesday. Will be under the Great American Bash banner. Is this just strictly a counter program to AEW? And if so, should AEW take this as a compliment that the NXT brand continues to stack their shows to go up against the weekly Dynamite episodes?
Certainly it's an upgrade from the WWE's previous position of, well, we'll ignore them and eventually they'll go away. This is quite blatant counter-programming, especially the two-night aspect, and especially when you consider they put Sasha Banks versus Io Shirai on the card. That is a big match that they are using to draw fans and to draw eyes. So yeah, it looks pretty intentional to me.
If this is the strategy they're going with, how long can NXT really keep this up? Where, we know that the ratings battle every week is very, very close between AEW and NXT. And usually when NXT loads up their shows like this one, they usually do pull out the victory. But how long can NXT keep this up where they keep putting out these stacked cards and these themed shows to run up against AEW Dynamite before eventually, we don't even really have much to look forward to takeovers because we've seen a lot of them on these big cards, every week just trying to beat out AEW Dynamite.
Well, the WWE's resources are near limitless. When all else fails, they can still put Randy Orton in a match against Tommaso Ciampa. They can still do all of these things. And of course, the USA Network certainly isn't going to complain if they're doing everything possible to bring in more viewership. They can keep this up for a very long time. And I think based on the fact that AEW does have a limited roster to fill the show that they have, rather than a roster that is far too bloated like we have seen in the WWE in the past, their resources do outstrip AEW.
Do you think that AEW has done the quote-unquote COVID era better than the WWE up to this point? And by that I mean, AEW was the first to have crowds, have their roster members as crowd members at their shows. They do seem to have a little bit more of a diverse roster on their shows. It's not always necessarily the same group of 12 to 15 wrestlers that you see week after week like we've kind of started to see with Raw because they're only bringing, small groups of people in at a time. So do you think that AEW has been a little bit ahead of the curve of producing shows during this pandemic compared to the WWE?
For employee safety, yes, definitely. When it comes to show quality, I'm not so sure, because a large part of the COVID era is the move to the more cinematic age. The Boneyard match is still the pinnacle of that age for me, with Money in the Bank fighting in the background with a stadium stampede. So while the quality of the shows has been good, WWE have used the format a little better, in my opinion. They lent into the fact that there was no crowd for a long time, and we got to see some Edge and Orton promos, and in fact some Seth Rollins promos that were absolutely fantastic in silence.
Last thing on the topic, the Great American Bash name, Dusty Rhodes' daughter actually came out on Twitter this past week and didn't seem too happy with the fact that the WWE was using Great American Bash as the name for this event. Anything you can tell us as far as where her discontent may be coming from, or just the fact of WWE's decision to use the Great American Bash as the title for this 2-week event on NXT?
The use of names that used to be in WCW has been a sticking point for a while now. But in reality, to my knowledge, the WWE own the trademark for the name the Great American Bash. So I'm not sure if there's anything anyone else can do about it.
Yeah, and like I said, legalities aside, I think, Dusty Rhodes does get a lot of the credit for creating the Great American Bash and other events in the Crockett era and WCW era. So, despite who owns it, I think anytime anybody hears that, it's going to be an homage to the Dream, and that's what everybody's going to think of. So I think in the end, despite who owns it or who makes money from it, ultimately, if you hear Great American Bash and it's being used in 2020 and it brings Dusty Rhodes and his contributions to the wrestling business back to people's minds when they hear it, I think that can only be a positive thing.
It's like I said earlier about Googling a name and you find out what they did in their previous time. When you Google the Great American Bash, it is so linked to Dusty Rhodes that it will drive traffic to AEW as well. And I think that's one of the reasons they will bring it up a little bit in the coming weeks to make sure people know where that name came from.
Well, we appreciate everybody listening again this week. Make sure that you are liking and commenting on this week's video, and also subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. Make sure you're also subscribing to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well. He does videos and talks about a lot more wrestling news and notes and rumors that he's reporting on over there, so make sure that you give his channel a follow as well. You can also follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue, and you can follow me at Korey Gunz. And also make sure that you check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We thank you for joining us again this week, and we will see you next time on the next Dropkick Discussions.